Vice Chair Frost. Commissioner Simmons.
Present.
Commissioner Prow.
Here.
And Commissioner Schmidt. And we did not hear from him, so I do not anticipate him tonight.
Thank you.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Would you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of
of
the
the
United
United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Discussion, approval, disapproval of the minutes of the regular meeting conducted on November 15th, 2018. Do we have any comments, gentlemen? Then I will move that we approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
I will second.
You have a... I'm sorry.
A motion and a second.
Thank you. I have a motion by the chair, second by Commissioner Simmons.
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passed. No new business tonight. Must be the holidays. Okay, public hearings. Staff presentation and public hearing to solicit input regarding case PZ 1834TA, a proposed text amendment to the Town of Florence Development Code definitions and Part 7. Parking, loading and unloading. Motion to direct staff to schedule a second public hearing for Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on January 17, 2019 for possible recommendation to town. So I am looking for a motion for staff to solicit the input.
I'll make the motion.
I have a motion by Commissioner, oh, I'm going to mess this up.
Approve.
Say it?
Approve.
Prue. Do I have a second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Staff presentation, public hearing to solicit input regarding PZ 1833TA, a proposed text amendment to the Town of Florence Development Code definitions, Part 3, sign regulations. Motion to direct staff to schedule a second public hearing for Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of January 17, 2019 for possible recommendation to Town Council.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, we need to do these one at a time since they're listed as separate items.
All right, now you're losing me because we've done a motion and we've given you the,
No, we need to, when the presentation by staff is very brief, but we need to open a public hearing to solicit comment from the public, which it should be very short. And then normally you would close the public hearing and then make the motion to set a new public hearing for January 17th.
all right, here's my problem.
But what we're,
On the agenda, it does not open up to public discussion.
I'm sorry, we didn't put it in enough detail then, but you have to open a public hearing to solicit comment. But what we were going to suggest is to not close the public hearing, and the motion would be to continue the public hearing to January 17th. And that way we don't have to re-advertise it quite as heavily.
I understand what
Yeah.
you're saying.
My apologies, sir.
All right, God help the person writing these minutes. All right, I have to think for a minute. So what we're looking for is a motion to open up for public comment
I think you could just open the public.
to direct, yeah, see, this is where it's all, we'll just open up for public hearing on Town of Florence Development Code definitions, Part 7, parking, loading, and unloading. God, I hope that was English. Do I have a motion?
Just
Yeah.
Yeah,
Need a motion for that.
No, you don't need a motion to open a public hearing.
you're making me crazy. All
It's-
right,
It's a short trip for me anymore. I'm sorry.
all right, so then we're open for public comment, and I believe the gentleman at the podium has a public comment?
As a brief presentation in order to initiate the discussion.
Okay. Oh, you didn't help me with this agenda at all,
We will do better next time.
I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Chairman Pranzo and Commissioners. As you mentioned, this item is a public hearing for the text amendments we've been working on the parking and loading zone text amendment we've been working on the last 2-3 months. I do have a brief presentation that just kind of gives the higher level changes from the current code to this code. You clearly have been involved with this for some time. We can certainly expedite that presentation or just move beyond it if you wish, if the commission wishes. And then I would also add, I'll leave that up to you, Chairman, if you'd like to hear the presentation or see it, or just move along with a recommendation from staff.
I'm tempted to just move along.
Okay.
However, I have to be cognizant of the fact that perhaps there are interested people watching us via television. So your presentation just may solicit comments from the public. So I think it would be best if we go ahead with it.
Very good. Chairman and Commissioners, this is the parking code presentation. Started into the presentation, it looks like. Again, this is case number PZ 18-34, and it's a text amendment proposed by Town of Florence. Thank you very much. So why are we updating the loading and parking regulations? Well, the last update was in 2006, and a lot of things have changed. A lot of Anthem has developed, and the town has learned a lot and had the opportunity to exercise that update to the code in 2006, and we've learned a few things. One thing that we learned was we need more flexibility to effectively serve different scenarios that we receive. If you recall, we had a church application come in earlier this year, and the minimum standard or minimum requirements for parking didn't quite put help out our ability to facilitate that development to occur as expeditiously as we would have hoped. So that's one item, and then a number of other little items I'll dive into in a second, necessitating these updates. Also, we recognize the need to establish minimum design standards, for instance, widths and drive aisles and dimensions for parking spaces and so forth. For some reason, they're just not in the code, but they had been at one time. And then finally, also want to update, make sure we capture any new technology or changes in development patterns that would be impacted by a parking code, or that could be assisted by having a more thoughtful parking code. So, quickly run through the overview of changes, those last three items I mentioned. First, we have to mention both the parking code as well as the sign code. Any changes to these codes are grandfathered or existing uses, existing parking lots and businesses and their signage in the next agenda item are all grandfathered, so they're not immediately impacted by this change in code. The only time existing development would be impacted is when they want to make a change. They change their use or they change their parking demands and so forth. So want to make sure that's clear as well. Okay, and then as with all our codes, we tend to expand the terms and definitions to make sure that we're very clear in what the code is trying to accomplish and the certain terms related to those topics. Now the meat of the changes and updates, again, were to create the flexibility in the existing parking requirements, as well as we wanted to update existing standards to reflect best practices and new technologies and make sure we're staying current with our ordinances, as well as we recognize the need to enhance the parking facilities and maintenance responsibilities just to make sure it was clear, should there ever be a need for code compliance or anything like that, that we have the language to be effective in our, as well as make sure we are clear with property owners who maintain parking lots and so forth, what those responsibilities are. So really quickly, those last three items, we're going to take a deeper dive. Flexible parking regulations and what was done in this proposed amendment. First, we reduced the requirements for parcels with parking areas of 20 spaces or less. So we kind of carved out smaller developments, which would be more of your mom and pop or downtown parking locations, saying they won't be required to provide the tree diamonds in the middle of their small 20 space or less parking lot. And then there's a couple other, they won't be required to provide any conduit for electrical vehicle parking or anything like that. We're trying to be business friendly for those smaller developments. Also, the existing parking code has a maximum allowed parking space. So we have a parking space schedule for each use, a church use or a restaurant. Based on their square footage, they're required to provide a certain number of parking spaces. Well, that ordinance also says by no means will any development have more than 120% of the minimum required parking. So they couldn't go over their parking by their minimum required parking by 20%. And we've seen the need to have some flexibility in that ordinance at times. So for that reason, we thought, I think the language is written that you can go above and beyond the 20%, given that it's justified and it's clear and it's at the discretion of the zoning administrator or your community development director. But we want to make sure we don't put shackles on ourselves to look at certain uses. Who knows what the next use might be? But I think one of the scenarios we experienced this year was a church parking area where we knew they could provide more parking, and they probably should be allowed to do that. However, our code wasn't necessarily helping that situation occur. And then finally, for flexible parking regulations, we're allowing portions of parking areas to be impervious surface or paved in a different manner. Those areas that are rarely used, except for on the peak time of the holiday season or whenever, we would like to give the ability to do a pervious surface because that helps with their drainage and retention calculations, as well as the heat island effect and reducing heat island and other reasons. But areas that don't have a lot of vehicle travel, it would again be at the administrator's discretion to look at if it would meet a criteria to allow for an impervious surface or an alternative paving standard in a portion of the parking area. Now, we also updated the parking standards, as I mentioned, specifically the number of required parking spaces, which are based on use. Within the existing parking code, you have a schedule, like I mentioned, each use, how many spaces are required for each use based on their size or number of employees, et cetera. Just updated that whole item. We knew church parking was real low, and there's a few others that were coming in grossly low based on how churches and other uses function today and their parking demand. So we got that updated to kind of our peer community best practices and their schedules as well. So we're consistently applying this within our geographic area here. Also, landscape islands for shade and visual enhancement. And I think at our last Planning Commission meeting, there was a bit of a discussion on how are we providing and encouraging shade within our parking areas. So parking areas with more than 20 spaces and what we consider larger parking areas, we did also include the requirement for those parking diamonds to allow a tree to go within the parking area to provide additional shade and comfort for patrons of a business or just guests or residents in a multifamily community circumstance. There is a schedule included in in the draft that shows how many islands would be required based on the type of use, basically. And it's no greater than any of our peer communities' requirements. Again, continuing with updated parking standards, we also looked at dimensions, as I mentioned. Your current code requires a minimum of 40-foot wide curb cut from the right-of-way into a parking lot or parking area. I don't know that that's necessarily been fully enforced because I see newer development that's occurred that doesn't meet that 40-foot requirement. But typically in our experience, 32-foot is a good minimum width for commercial ingress egress. Now, if they want to bifurcate that or have a left out as well as a right out, you know, that would go to that 40 foot, and that's specified within this code. So we hope to, you know, alleviate any circumstances that may occur with requiring a 40-foot drive aisle access entrance to a small business. And then also access, we reinforce the language in the code with regards to access and maneuvering for fire and refuse collection. Want to make sure that's clear and understandable to designers and property owners, what that we need to accommodate, and it is the fire's responsibility or the trash refuse collection responsibility to look at our plans and make sure they're getting adequate turn radiuses and so forth. And then finally, we codified a schedule for parking dimensions and drive-out dimensions. As I mentioned, this was once in the town's code. This is in about, I've never worked in a community without a similar schedule to this, and these are very much standard dimensions in the industry. And then finally, updated parking standards also include off-site and joint-use parking. Opportunities are expanded and given some more latitude to encourage the use of shared parking and other parking spaces within parameters, particularly the downtown historic area, where that makes the most sense, or in inline retail and other developments that occur not within the same contiguous development. We also took the opportunity to insert language for parking RV and trailers and storing them on residential properties. It's very consistent with, I think, what you see most communities do today, behind the 6-foot wall and screen it. Not something we like to see sitting out in the frontage of the property. And then finally, beefed up the ADA space requirements and provide for both van accessible and standard ADA parking spaces, which the current code did not specify. And then finally, the new technology, electric vehicle provisions. We do have a requirement to any parking lots with greater than 20 spaces along the highway corridors. We'd like conduit installed to at least one parking space. Chandler actually is doing that as well. The only community that we found in the valley that requires any electric vehicle parking spaces is Maricopa, the town of city of Maricopa. And they have a very modern, updated code as of recent, probably went way into the future in many respects. But that's obviously a different situation than the town of Florence. So with that, we also beefed up some of the language with regards to maintenance of existing parking facilities for private properties. So again, one flexibility that we built into the code was to exempt any changes of use that would necessitate more than or less than 20 spaces or 10% of increase in parking on a site. So we're giving some latitude. If there is a requirement to increase 3, 4, 5 spaces based on their change of use, there's some discretion allowed for the zoning administrator or your community development director to look at the situation, understand all the details and use and time of use and so forth, and make a determination if they can be exempted from some level of parking improvement for an expanded use or change in use. And then again, we beefed up the maintenance responsibilities, just reiterating that landscaping is a part of the parking area, and that is required to be replaced when it's damaged or dead, per the original approved plan, and generally maintained as well, in terms of weed control and washout areas and things of that nature. And then finally, additional language with regards to the timeliness of parking improvements on developments as they come through. It gives us the ability to phase some of the parking improvements that make sense based on how a property might be developing. That's it. So with that, Chairman and Commissioners, staff recommends the Planning and Zoning Commission continue this public hearing to the next the January 17th meeting. And at that time, we'll also recommend the Planning and Zoning Commission for deposit positive recommendation for council's approval and adoption of these text amendments, including the amendments that are shown and itemized in Exhibit B in your staff packets, through additional discussion with the community and our internal staff and other departments. A few items came out through our review with them to make some modifications. You'll see those in your packet.
Mr.
So-
Chairman, if I might, the reason for requesting that we just continue the public hearing is we'd like to give the public a little bit longer time, maybe do a few more discussions outside of a formal meeting, just to make sure that we have as much distribution of information as possible before any kind of a recommendation from the commission, so that it doesn't even appear like we're trying to, fast track or anything like that. And so what we would suggest is in the language that was on the agenda, it would be motion to continue the public hearing for Planning and Zoning Commission to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of January 17th for possible recommendation to council. That's the simplest way to do it. And then at that meeting, when this item comes up, it just basically announce that the public hearing is still open and provide the opportunity for more comment. Then you would close the public hearing, and then there'll be a choice of motions that you could have at that point, and we'll provide you with that list.
Thank you. I think most of all, by January 17th, it's important that we have a chance to understand the public and staff comments that have been incorporated into this document. I know there's a timeline, but I don't want to rush it.
Right.
So, I am looking for a motion to continue the public hearing to January 17, 2019. Do I have a motion?
I will motion as you said.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
I have a motion by Chairman Frost, second by Commissioner Simmons. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Okay. B, staff presentation and public hearing to solicit input regarding case BZ 1833 TA, a proposed text amendment to the Town of Florence Development Code definitions and Part 3 sign regulations, and a motion to direct staff to schedule a second public hearing for Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of January 17th, 2019 for possible recommendation to Town Council. So I am looking for a motion to open a public hearing.
I'll make the motion to open a public hearing.
Do I have a second?
You don't?
Second.
Am I screwing this up, Mr. Frost?
You don't need to, you can open a public hearing as the chairman of this.
Right.
All right.
Correct. That's correct.
This is the man in charge.
Okay.
I'm getting directed by the staff.
Thank you, sir. We are open. We have opened the public hearing.
Okay.
Chairman, Commissioners, speed this one up. Same scenario as last with regards to how we discussed this item. One item I did leave out, since our last meeting, we did hold a neighborhood meeting that was advertised, and it was advertised in many different ways. But it was held at the community center. We had great dialogue with probably 5 residents, including a Chamber of Commerce representative, and council member, and a few other members. So that said, we feel like we've done a great job getting out word to the public to the extent that they were interested to be involved with this. We have requested the Chamber of Commerce to continue, because sign code and parking ordinances are so important to businesses, that they continue to help us push out the information and make it available to them. So we're continuing on that effort. That said, I don't need to tell you why we have sign code, but it's to balance the need for businesses to advertise themselves and say stuff through sign messages and maintain the town's desire to be beautiful and safe. Quickly, overview of changes. updated the terms again, and then reorganized. For clarity, if you recall, this draft was originally prepared back in probably 2015, if not late 2014. Largely, most communities across the nation have updated their sign codes in response to the Gilbert, Reed versus Gilbert Supreme Court ruling. And I explained that in the staff report if you want to know additional details. There's one section that we inserted since the original draft that is very specific to how the town operates, and that's in the code for you to review. But basically, we need to make sure that we are not basing our discussion or signs on the content of the sign, but of the time, place, and manner that they're displayed. One of the other big changes, increasing monument signs along our highway corridors up to 15 feet, and then shorter signs in arterial roads and non-highway locations, and then down to 12 and 8 also. We also are now allowing one electronic digital sign per parcel, but that's excluded in the historic district. However, there is language allowing the historic district to approve whatever types of signage they wish, should they find something that is furthering, enhancing the historic area in the district. Also, a change was to guarantee a minimum of 16 square foot of wall signage. So in the rare instance we have a very narrow building, they're going to be allowed to have at least 16 square foot signage. Drive-through menu boards may go from 40 feet from the right-of-way up to 25 feet from the right-of-way, which should loosen up and give a little flexibility. Maximum aggregate sign area for commercials increased because of the way it's calculated, and that's something that was built into the original draft. It's really not going to, you're not going to see more signage necessarily. It's carving out how different types of signs on a private property are measured in an aggregate way. So current code is saying every sign, all the signage on the property can't exceed the lineal frontage area. Well, this one says, well, you're allowed to have, the new update says you're allowed to have a monument sign of this square foot and this, and then you're allowed to have building signage based on the width of your building. So that's the big difference. That's it. Pretty minimal.
And this, Mr. Chairman, would be the same circumstance. We would suggest modifying the motion that's listed on the agenda to say motion to continue the public hearing again, to the January 17th meeting,
Okay.
should you so desire.
I'm asking for a motion to continue the public hearing to January 17th, 2019. Do we have a brave soul?
I'll make the motion to continue.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Pro and second by Vice Chair Frost. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion carried.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Please.
Just a thank you to staff. I really appreciate the format and the illustrations that give guidance by picture on what you're expecting. I think that helps it a lot, and the fact that you've put them right adjacent to the text, I think helps a lot too. Thank you very much.
Okay, moving right along. We have a presentation. Future agenda items, information only. Staff will inform the commission of upcoming agenda items.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, actually this is a very timely item. It's tentatively scheduled for your January 3rd meeting, which would be your next meeting in 2 weeks. But in line with some of the recommended updates to the sign code that we're now considering, we'll be bringing forward to you a comprehensive sign package for the Florence Hospital. They have submitted for new signs. As you may be aware, there is a new owner, Stewart Medical, which is as I understand, the largest privately held medical supplier provider in the country. They're one of the largest, profit and not-profit. I think they're a third or fourth largest total. But they have purchased this, and Mountain Vista Hospital, and Mountain Vista is already open and operating. The one in Anthem, they are working on now making a few improvements to it to better meet their model. and they're working on their state certification. In the meantime, we have looked at a package of signage and run some calculations. The way the PUD is written in our code, it allows for a comprehensive sign package to make certain allowances for change to the hard and fast standards in the sign code.
Is this a new PUD?
No, that's the PUD is for overall of Anthem. It's part of that PUD.
Okay.
But the way the PUD allows for different uses to have modifications to the current standards in the sign code for height and area. And so they'll be coming forward as a comprehensive sign program with some minor tweaks to the you know, the black and white standards as they now exist if it was for something that was just on a hard zoned property, like a B2 or something of that nature. In any event, I'm just waiting for the final application to come in. I'm expecting it tomorrow. That being the case, we'll schedule it for that meeting. We'll be looking at a total sign package, starting with the monument sign out front, directional signs on the property, and then wall-mounted and fascia-mounted signage to move traffic through, identify emergency versus you know, regular standard visitor center area or visitor areas, things of that nature. So this is an important project, obviously, for the town. As part of the comprehensive sign package procedure, you will be making a recommendation either to approve with stipulations, or a recommendation of denial that goes to the town council.
Okay, I want to ask you, do we have the PUD as a digital format?
On the website, do you mean? Or
No, like in your,
in our files, yes, I have an electronic copy.
okay. We have new commissioners, and if you would, please, if you would send them
Sure.
a copy of the PUD. Just so you understand, PUD stands for Plan Unit Development.
Thank you.
And it's basically the concept is that when a developer comes in and he's going off of the town ordinances, he provides us, or we agree on, this very subjective document that he uses as a guideline for his development. So it's something that you need to come up to speed on.
Good idea. We will do that.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, could I also ask a question, or a favor, or question, please? Or when you make this presentation on the 3rd, would you also compare and contrast that to what we've been approving here as part of the sign code so that we could see how it marries up with this? When we see some of those packages, if it complies with the new code or if it doesn't, just so we kind of have a pictorial representation of what we've been working on here with the newest sign package
Right.
coming through.
Yeah, and in this case, you will find that some of the items that are going to be a variation do comply with the new code, and a couple of them are a little bit, you know, maybe even a little bit beyond that. But there's logical reason for that we'll be presenting as part of the findings.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then we will have a call to the public. Call to the public for public comment on issues within the jurisdiction of Planning and Zoning Commission. Individual commission members may respond to criticisms made, may ask staff to review a matter raised, or may ask that the matter be put on a future agenda. However, members of the commission shall not discuss or take action on any matter during an open call to the public unless the matters are properly noticed for discussion and legal action, which gives me a teachable moment. For those who are new to the commission, what that simply means is that if it's not on the agenda, we don't talk about it. Okay, close the call to the public, call to the commission, current events only. Do we have any comments, gentlemen? Well, then, I do. Another year has come and gone, and I would like to wish everybody a very happy and safe holiday. I look forward to seeing you after the new year.
To you as well.
Thank you.
With that, I'll close call to the commission and ask for a motion for adjournment.
I will motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I will second that motion.
I have a motion by Commissioner Simmons, second by Commissioner Pearl. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We are adjourned.
Thank you, gentlemen.